So, good evening, everyone, and let us carry on with the questions and see what happens. Okay. Dear Ajahn, some people say that it's unfathomable how anyone but the Buddha could have put together something that has so much wisdom and complexity as the Abhidhamma. As an advocate of the suttas over the Abhidhamma, could you please point out some of the factual evidence why the Abhidhamma was not taught by the Buddha? I think Venerable Analayo wrote a book about this. What are his main points? Did the Buddha actually teach this to his mother in heaven? So I think that is kind of the starting point, the kind of one of the telltale signs that something is a bit dodgy, that the Abhidhamma started because the Buddha taught it to his mum in the heavenly realm. It's straight away, it sounds like some kind of excuse, right? Why would he start teaching the Abhidhamma to his mother? It's kind of weird. Yeah, it does sound, and the place where this is found in one of the commentaries to the Abhidhamma. That's where that story is found. The Buddha doesn't say himself that he taught this to his mum. If he was going to teach the Abhidhamma to anyone, it would have been to maybe Venerable Sariputta or something. His mother wasn't even a Buddhist. Yeah, she was in heaven. She died when he was 7 days old. The whole thing kind of sounds very implausible and dodgy from the start, get-go. It sounds like some kind of excuse, some kind of making up a reason after the fact why the Abhidhamma is authentic and why it kind of matters as much as it does. So this is the first point, but there are many, many reasons why the Abhidhamma is later than the suttas. And the first one, you can start with just the language. The language is different. The vocabulary is different. New words are being used that you don't find in the suttas. The way the language is used is very different. It expresses things in a different way. You know straight away that you're dealing with a different kind of literature when you read it. There's nothing like it in the suttas. It's just different way to put it together. For example, the suttas always begin with Evang me sutang ekang samayang bhagava, whereas the Abhidhamma always begins Yasming Samaya. Yasming Samaya means on whatever occasion. So on whatever occasion, it's a way of phrasing it that kind of does away with time and place, and kind of it tries to make it into some kind of universal principle. That's kind of the idea. So it's a different way of phrasing it. In the Vinaya Pitaka, it's usually Tena Samayena. So each Pitaka has a slightly different way of starting out. But the Abhidhamma is very different. And it doesn't say that the Buddha said these things. It just says on whatever occasion this happens, then so and so. So different vocabulary, different ways of phrasing it, entirely different feeling to the text, incredibly dry. There's nothing really that spruces it up, no metaphors, no similes, no stories, no the Buddha was doing this or that. All of that is missing in there. So this is a very important point. The second point is that the way it is expressed is that it develops the ideas of the suttas further. It brings in new ideas. You can see that the foundation are the sutta ideas, and it takes the sutta position and starts bringing in new things. You get the feeling that it is trying to fill in the gaps very often in the suttas and make it a more complete picture. So it is a development based on earlier ideas. One of the most important points for knowing that it is later is, again, the idea of comparative study. So Abhidhamma existed in all the early schools of Buddhism. And the Abhidhamma of some of the other schools is still in existence in translation in Chinese, ancient Chinese. And so we have the Abhidhamma of the Sarvastivadin school. We have the Abhidhamma of Dharmaguptaka school. When it's called the Sariputra Abhidharma. And so you can compare what these different Abhidhammas look like. And they are basically very different. There's a small core that is similar, and the vast majority is just very different. Whereas the suttas, when you compare them of the different schools, are, a large number of them are basically the same. And so you know that these ones are pre-sectarian, prior to the point when they started to divide up into different schools. Whereas the Abhidhamma is largely sectarian. It is made up by the various schools, so you know it is later. So all the evidence points in that direction. So for me, it is more wondering, why does anyone claim that the Abhidhamma was spoken by the Buddha? To me, it's just silly. I don't know how, and the only reason why people claim that is because it has become part of the culture to such an extent that everyone just accepts it, and that's why these things happen. So everything really points in that direction. Yes, Venerable Analayo, he wrote a book called the what's it called again? Something about the origin of the Abhidhamma, something like that. It's actually a nice book to read. The Dawn of the Abhidhamma, I think it's called. And it gives some of the evidence for why the Abhidhamma is later than the suttas. And it kind of develops the idea how it happened and this kind of thing. It's a very nice book. He has written some really nice books, Venerable Analayo. That's one of them. He also has a book called the Provenance of the Bodhisattva Ideal, or something like that. In other words, where the Bodhisattva ideal came from. And also a very nice book that kind of looks at some of the ideas you find in the suttas, and then how that developed into Bodhisattva idea over time. And very convincing arguments that he makes in both of these areas. So something like that. Yeah, there's a lot of things there. That the Abhidhamma has so much wisdom, well, that is kind of debatable, right? Complexity, okay, yes, it's quite complex, but whether it's wisdom or not, well, that is a bit more uncertain. And this is kind of the problem. They will argue it has a lot of wisdom in it, but whether that is true depends on the observer. The idea is that the Abhidhamma is the ultimate expression of the Dhamma, that the suttas are just a conventional expression of the Dhamma. The Abhidhamma is the ultimate, absolute expression. And that is a very dicey suggestion. I would say it's the other way around. It is the suttas that are the ultimate expression of the Dhamma, and the Abhidhamma is basically just a commentary on the suttas. It comments on the suttas, tries to kind of fill in the blanks and that kind of thing. And I think the word Abhidhamma almost means a commentary. This is what you find in the Vinaya Pitaka. There's a book called the Parivara, the last book of the Vinaya Pitaka. And in there it defines the word Abhidhamma. And the way it is defined as the commentarial part of the Vinaya, which comments on the rules. That's Abhivinaya. Yeah, and that means that Abhidhamma, which is parallel to Abhivinaya, must be the commentarial part that comments on the suttas. So I think there's a good case to be made that Abhidhamma is one of the earliest commentaries on the suttas. That to me is a better way of thinking about it than to think about it as something that certainly doesn't supersede the sutta. That's a very silly claim. All right. Okay, dear Bhante, thank you for your teachings. You have given voice to ideas I have felt inside for a long time, but have been unable to properly understand or giving expression to them. Yes, that is a very good point. I think the purpose of a teacher, the Buddha even, is to kind of give rise to the latent understanding that everyone has. Many of these things we know already, but when you hear them coming from the Buddha, it's like, okay, that strengthens your sense of confidence in your own intuition and in your own understanding. And that is such an important part. Most of these things are fairly obvious. Non-self is not obvious. That's the one thing that is kind of deep and profound. But a lot of the earlier parts of the Dhamma are kind of, yes, actually I get this. Let me go deeper into it. Bhante, my question is this. Is it helpful to make visualizations while dying? For example, of the Buddha bathed in a golden light. Yes, there is nothing wrong with making visualizations, as long as those visualizations help you to build up a positive mind state. That's kind of the purpose here. And so if the purpose here is to bring forth faith, or metta or karuna and these qualities, and you use that visualization to that effect, and you have tried it before, so you know that it works for you, and it brings up these positive feelings, then great. Please do so. Or you can just do anapanasati to make you feel relaxed, or anything that kind of brings up a wholesome mind when you're dying is obviously very helpful. It makes the whole process much easier and nicer and more relaxed. So doesn't matter so much whether it's visualization or not. What matters are the qualities of mind that you bring up at that time. Dear Ajahn, does Arahant have to bear the fruit of unwholesome karmas done in previous lives in his last birth? Thank you. I think the answer is probably yes, because you see that with Angulimala. Angulimala had to bear the fruit of his actions. Yeah, that was not in his previous life, but it was in this life. So if you have to bear it in this life, you probably can also sometimes have to bear from previous lives as well, especially if they are very strong karmas. But it is not the case that you have to exhaust all karma. Sometimes you hear the thing that you have to exhaust all the karma from the past, but that is impossible because the store of karma is just so great. So some of the karma becomes annulled, it becomes kind of defunct because you become an arahant. So you can't really bear fruit anymore. It's known as ahosi karma in the Abhidhamma. Talking about Abhidhamma, ahosi karma means past karma, basically. Was, ahosi means was karma that was. In other words, is eliminated. And so that is the most important thing. One of those really nice similes in the suttas, the question arises, do you have to experience every bad deed that you do? And the answer is yes, but you water it out. You dilute the effects of the karma. And the famous simile is a simile of the lump of salt. The same lump of salt, if you put it in a glass, it will make it very salty and undrinkable. In other words, the effect of the karma is very strong because the quantity of salt, the quantity of bad karma, is large compared to the quantity of water, which is the good karma. Take the same lump of salt and put it in a large pond. The simile is actually the river Ganges. So that's kind of really. Of course, if you put that same salt in the river Ganges, I don't know if you've seen the river Ganges. It's enormous. Depends a bit where you see it, but if you see that Patna is like several kilometers wide, it's this absolute. Every river in India was so large. Can believe it going there. Whenever you cross the river, this is just a small river and kind of 300 meters wide or something. It's just really, really astonishing. So the lump of salt in the river Ganges, basically you can't taste it, or maybe you can taste a tiny bit if you have a really sharp taste buds, but normally you can't taste it. And that's how you dilute the results of those karmas. And that's kind of the idea there. And then when you become an arahant, some of those karmas become completely defunct. They can't really ripen anymore. So, so the answer is yes, you may receive a little bit as an arahant, but usually very, very little will remain at that point. Okay. Dear Ajahn, I have been working in aged care for 10 years, and I see many elderly people prescribed and taking so much medicine and tablets. They take so much that their bodies often don't cope, and this leads to more problems like fluid buildup, living like overwatered plants. As a carer, I sometimes wish we could all accept aging a lot more and not confuse our bodies so much. I do hope you and Ajahn Brahm never have to take so many medicines in the future. It's a good point. We try to medicate everything, and personally, I don't like medicines very much. I try to avoid it as much as possible. As a monk, people are very kind to you. Yeah, it's but one of those beautiful things about being a monk is that, or a nun, I suppose. People always look after you, and they bring you medicines, and they kind of really. I was just in India, and I think I coughed on a couple of occasions. I got this pile of medicine straight away, one cough. Yeah, it's very funny, yeah, when that happens. It's very endearing on one hand, but on the other hand, I don't really want those medicines, to be honest. And so, yeah, I tend to agree. Usually the body looks after itself, yeah. And these pharmaceutical companies, of course, they really want to sell their medicine. That's how they make their money. And so they have a lot of vested interest. And sometimes you just have to stand your ground and say, no, sorry, I don't want you to take those medicines. I'm fed up with all these stupid medicines. And of course it does something to your body. Of course it has an effect. And of course that effect, but there will be side effects for every kind of medicine, of course. So, but there comes a point when you have to take medicines. It's just finding that balance, I suppose. So it is a very good point. Finding the right balance, knowing when to take medicines, when not to. And sometimes that's difficult because we're all brainwashed to think that we need them or whatever. So it can be hard. But the general point, I agree with what you're saying here. All right. Dear Ajahn, you mentioned that one enters jhanas amongst other things as cause and conditions come together. So how can one enter jhana at will? Thanks a lot. So you can enter the jhana at will when the causes and conditions are so strong that they are always present. Yeah, and you know what those causes and conditions are, so you ensure that they are present. You don't do things that are so stupid that they destroy those causes and conditions. You have a sense restraint. You have mindfulness and clear comprehension. You look after your virtue. You remember right view, impermanence. You let go of things, generally speaking. Yeah, and so that ability to understand the cause and conditions means that you maintain those causes and conditions, and then you can enter jhana at will when you do that. That's kind of the idea. This becomes especially so once you become an Arya. Because when you're an Arya, well, you know the Dhamma, and so when you know the Dhamma, then it's easy to keep the Noble Eightfold Path. You have internalized the Noble Eightfold Path. You have kind of become the Noble Eightfold Path. Yes, this idea of the five khandhas kind of becoming the Noble Eightfold Path in a sense. And then those causes and conditions tend to be maintained by themselves. Yeah, and so they are there, and then you can enter these states pretty much whenever you like. Yeah, it may never come quite to that point whenever you like. Maybe except for the anagami, the non-returner. Well, the non-returner, they will be able to do this whenever they like, but not others. It's more, a bit more dicey, obviously. So something like that, I think, is the answer. Dear Bhante, thank you for teaching this retreat. My question is this. Is it possible that wishing metta to persons with toxic or even evil personalities can open a channel or connection that is dangerous to oneself? I know a couple of persons who fit this description. And I feel fear about wishing them metta, but maybe my fear is baseless and ungrounded. I don't think you have anything to fear. In fact, metta is one of the great protectors. And if you have a lot of metta, you will generally be protected. And such people will not really have any influence on you. Yeah, I don't think you have to worry. The Buddha had metta to the whole world, and that certainly didn't seem to be a problem to him. But on the other hand, wishing metta for such people is maybe not necessary. Yeah, you can just start with metta with someone you really respect, someone who it kind of comes naturally to, and then you can just spread it to the whole world. You don't have to direct it specifically towards these people. You can just spread it out to everyone instead. That might be a better way of doing it. Just establish the metta, establish the feeling, and then spread it everywhere. Yeah. I mean, there's different ways of doing this. the classical Visuddhimagga way is to start with the person you respect, and then go to the neutral person, then go to the difficult person. You can do that. It's like expanding the circle of people that you include, or you can do it more generally to the directions. So the different ways. But do what you feel comfortable with as well. Don't look after yourself. This is certainly very important on this path. So you don't kind of move too far outside of your comfort zone. It's important to go outside of our comfort zone sometimes, otherwise we tend to get stuck in old habits. But know what, make sure that you feel reasonably safe and reasonably okay with it. It is actually quite useful to do metta towards everyone, even people you consider bad or evil or have toxic personalities, because you learn to see people in a new way. You learn to kind of open up to compassion towards, because if someone really is toxic and evil, they are going to really hurt as a consequence. And even if they don't hurt so much in this life, they are building up enormous amounts of bad karma. And so these people are, they actually need that sort of compassion. And so, sometimes you see maybe leaders in the world who you may not agree with, you may think are kind of doing bad things, but they too are trapped in that situation that they are in. They don't really know what they are doing. And so, you spread this out to everyone. You learn to see people in a new way. And this is very, very useful, because it means that, in the future, these defilements of anger and ill will, they will be really reduced to an absolute minimum as a consequence. And this whole reconditioning of the way we think about things is one of the most important things that we're doing on the spiritual path. So, yes. Dear Ajahn, I have read all 4 Nikayas and continue to read and listen to the suttas, but I don't think I will ever have the knowledge like you and other people here do, e.g. recalling sutta numbers, quote in Pali and English, technical terms, points of contention, etc. It blows my mind. Is there some sort of system or method that you or others here employ to build up knowledge in this way? Or do you have an extremely good memory, or is it something else? I don't think it is an extremely good memory. I have a reasonably good memory, but certainly not extremely good. Bhante Sujato has a much better memory than me, for example. He can kind of memorize whole suttas and all kinds of stuff. I haven't even tried that, to be honest. But I think it has to do with, this is kind of my profession, This is what I do. And because I do it all the time, and because I've been interested in this from the very beginning, I started reading suttas over 30 years ago. It's a long time, 30 years. And after a while, you kind of build up a memory of these things. This is the focus of my life, It's very different. Presumably, you are not a monastic, and this will be kind of a part-time thing for you compared to what it is for me. And so I think that is the main thing. And I discuss these things with people all the time. I read papers. I sometimes write papers of my own. And all of these things mean that you build up a kind of knowledge. But there are some lay people who know a lot of Dhamma. People who have a background from Sri Lanka, I'm always amazed at how much they know. They probably learned some of these things in school. Some of these things. And so you and it's retained of, 30, 40 years later, they still remember these things they learned in school. And that's really nice, because you kind of have the Dhamma ready for yourself. But I think that is the main reason. I don't think it has anything to do with better memory or any system, anything. It's just that you are fully engaged with these things. And that full engagement means that you are, you just know these things because that engagement, because that is what your life is. That is certainly from the monastic side. So if I were you, I wouldn't worry so much about those things. They are not important. Whether you know the sutta numbers or whatever is completely irrelevant. It's kind of handy if you want to look things up, but it's not really relevant. So just enjoy the reading of the suttas. Focus on the Dhamma. Focus on learning. Don't even try to remember the sutta. Just focus at that time on what is going on. too much trying to remember can destroy from that intuitive feeling of what is happening right there and then, just enjoying, taking it on board. Yeah. And so just enjoy what is going on and read it again and again and again, and gradually just build up your sense for what these teachings are about. Venerable.
Remembering the Sutta numbers is not necessary, that's true.
Yeah.
But the Buddha said, though, that you retain it. So the 5 things, Sutta Datta,
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that's really important, right? If somebody really wants to get deep and get a good understanding and insights to come,
Yeah.
then doing that, just not reading itself.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is a very good point. So the idea is that when you have read something, that you reflect on what you have read. That's really important. Of course, in those days, you had to memorize it. There was no book, and so memorization was more important then than it is now. But some sense for the meaning is important, so you can reflect on it afterwards, and you can maybe reread it. That's a very important point. And as you reflect on it, you deepen your understanding of it. And as you deepen your understanding of it, you come to accept it. Yeah, this is the truth. This is what the world is like. And eventually you, manas, how does it go? Manas anupekkita, anupekkita, to look upon. And the last one is ditya patividya, supatividya, that's right. Ditya, thank you. Ditya supatividya, exactly. Well penetrated by view or something like that. And so, yes, so that thing is very important, because these things, they grow upon reflection. If you just read it and then you don't reflect on it, it kind of disappears very quickly. There's a nice little simile for this in the suttas, the simile of someone who has just received a large number of gems. Yeah, the suttas are like gems. And so they're sitting down with the legs crossed, they have got all these gems in their lap. And then they just get up mindlessly and just walk off, and the gems just kind of roll all over the place. Yeah? Or they have the person who kind of collects the gems and carefully gets up and kind of collects them. And the same thing with the sutta, someone who listens to a talk or reads a talk and just gets up and walks off without thinking about it. That's like the gems spreading, and not collecting them together. So you should keep it in mind, reflect on it, etc., etc. Okay, dear Ajahn, the arising of spontaneous thought is a distraction in breath meditation. Why do these thoughts arise, and what can one do to minimize these thoughts? Thank you for your inspirational teachings. Spontaneous thoughts, you see, the thing is that they are less spontaneous than you might like to admit. Sorry, I'm being naughty now. The problem is that usually you want to think these thoughts, right? That's the problem. We actually want, you may not see that because it may seem like they arise out of nowhere, but there's always an intention behind every thought. You actually want to think it. If you were completely uninterested, there would not be no thoughts arising in your mind. So they always arise because we want to think them. So somehow you want to think these thoughts. And that can be kind of embarrassing. When you think about some of the thoughts you have, do I really want to think that? That's kind of terrible. Yes, this is kind of the feeling, because some of these thoughts are not necessarily very pleasant or very nice, and somehow they're coming from within you. But remember that they're not really your thoughts in the first place. These are caused and conditioned by the past, by all kinds of things. And so you don't have to take responsibility for those thoughts. So just see them as arising and passing away, and don't hold on to them any which way too much. And even if it is a brilliant thought, that brilliant thought too is not really from you, So if you can't take responsibility for the bad ones, you also can't take responsibility for the good ones either, That's the thing, And so we just allow these causes and conditions to unroll within us. The most important thing is then learn to not enjoy the thinking. There's two sides. When there is a problem, you have to learn to see the downside of the problem so you can let go of it. And then you have to learn to see the upside of the other side, the positive side, the non-problem side. See the upside of the still mind and the downside of the thoughts. And when you develop that perception of seeing the downside of thought and the upside of the still mind, that is in itself a kind of perception. When you develop that, it will aid your meditation. Where do these thoughts get me anyway? What is the purpose? Just more of the same, just going round and round, solving problems that I will never end anyway. There's always another problem behind this problem, going on and on and on. Why do I try to solve infinite problems? Actually, that's why I'm still here, because I tried to solve all these unsolved problems in the past. That's why I'm reborn into this life. Jeepers, I better stop this thinking of these things. Something like that. Yeah, and so then you kind of get away from this habit of thinking. If you're going to think, be very deliberate about it. Yeah, okay, I'm going to think thoughts of metta for a while. May all beings be well. May this person be well, whatever it is. Yeah, you think thoughts of metta. That's okay, because that is leaning the mind in the right direction. But it's a very deliberate kind of thinking. These spontaneous thoughts is just cause and conditions. It's like this movie going on inside of you over which you seemingly have no control. Directed thought is okay, because directed thought means it is purposeful. Then it is usually acceptable. Even like planning something, if you have to plan something. Okay, dear Ajahn, just a request. Could you please end the retreat with a fiery discourse from the Anattakana Sutta? Yeah, I'm not sure what happened to the... Adrian, could I have a quick look at the sutta as you have next to you? Because I'm not sure exactly what I... Thank you so much. That's great. So, where does it stop in this one here? It stops with the Anattakana Sutta. Okay, so that's kind of there. Okay, great. So, yeah, that's it. Let's see what happens. I make no guarantees, but I will keep it in mind at the very least. Okay, dear Ajahn, my spouse always fights with me. If I do charity, even when we can well afford to do so. If a family member opposes kind gestures, what to do? If you persist, it causes disharmony in the home, but there you lose on a noble cause. Okay, so your spouse does not like it when you do charity. What to do about that? Good question. This is kind of the problem sometimes when we're not really aligned in the family life. Yeah, so you have to maybe bring her to a Dhamma talk. I don't know if he or she is a Buddhist or not. If they are a Buddhist, then maybe you can bring them to a Dhamma talk, and you can say to the teacher, to the speaker, please talk about generosity and charity here. Yeah. You can do that with Ajahn Brahm. You can program Ajahn Brahm before he goes on stage. Ajahn Brahm is programmable. Yeah, you can ask people to do that. And sometimes if you have a nice request, then the speaker will actually oblige. That's one way of doing it. If this person, he or she, is a Buddhist, then you can say the Buddha really recommended charity. Yeah, really important on the beginning of the path. The gradual kind of exposition of the Dhamma always starts with generosity. It's so important. Yeah. When you tell your spouse these things, do it in a kind way, in a gentle way. If you do it by pushing these things too much, then you have a counter reaction. Yeah, take your spouse to one side, pat them on the shoulder and say, listen, darling, this is really important. Yeah, it feels so nice for me. It's really important to me to be able to do charity. You know, if you block me from doing this, you're blocking me from so much joy. This really matters to me. Say it in a way, come from your heart. Don't come from some kind of intellectual idea. Then they will listen to you. Because spouses normally want the happiness of their spouses. That's kind of the way things are. Yeah. So there is usually a way around this, but you have to do it in the right way. Yeah, do it in a gentle way. Most people are reasonable, and they will listen to you if you come from a good place and you're trying to convince them from a right place. Usually they will come around. Okay, what do you have in mind? Oh yeah. Oh, okay. Right. Yeah. Right? Yeah, so exactly. So this is kind of another important point, is that in the Dhamma, that sort of requires that you believe in rebirth. If you don't believe in rebirth, it's not going to work. But if you are a Buddhist and you believe in rebirth, then of course you have to invest for the long term, not for the short term. Most, if you don't want to give, then you are just focusing on the present life. All investment goes into the present life. But that's kind of being very short term. Yeah, if you go to a bank, they will always say invest for the long term, not for the short term. But in Buddhism, it's even longer term. It's like the really, really long term. Invest for the next 10 lifetimes, for the next 100 lifetimes, for the next, whatever. That's the right way of investing. And so the most important investment advisor of all is the Buddha. Number one investment advisor here, yeah, more so than any bank or anything like that, because he understands what needs to be invested in there. So that's a nice way of thinking about it. Long-term investment, not short-term investment. There's a nice sutta about that, actually, a sutta which has about the if a house is burning down, it is the pot that is taken out that is of use. Yeah, and the simile there is to show that the pot that is taken out, that is the goods, the wealth that you have given to charity, that is the pot that is taken out. Because everything else will come to an end when you die. Everything else will have to be given up. The only thing you can take with you into the future is the charity that you have done in this life. That is the pot that is rescued from the burning house. Your life is like a burning house. Get those pots out now, while you still can, before it is too late. These pots need to be removed. They are useless after the house is burnt down. They just melted into one big heap of metal. So see what you can do, something like that. Yeah, gradually convince your spouse with kindness, with care, showing that you are concerned about their point of view as well. Yeah, why are you so concerned about this? Yeah, what is the issue here? Can we find a middle way somewhere? Can I just give a little bit? I just want to give a tiny, tiny bit. Is that okay? Then I give a little bit more next time. Yeah, something like that. You have to make it fun as well. Yeah, have all of these kind of things, and hopefully you can find a way forward. Okay, dear Ajahn, can someone wise and intelligent in the worldly sense, like a Nobel laureate, etc., become a total fool in the next life? And does IQ play a role in understanding the Dhamma? Thank you. Normally not. Yeah, if you are very intelligent, these traits, human traits, tend to carry on. Yeah, so usually it changes quite slowly. So if you're very smart in this life, you're likely to be quite smart in your next life as well. But things like IQ or intelligence can change even within one life quite a lot. Yeah, you start out smart and you become stupid because whatever reason. And I once saw that there was some kind of thing about sunbathing, how sunbathing makes you really stupid. Because you're lying on the beach, vegging out, and you become real after a while. You become so. They had an IQ test beforehand and after, like you had a week on the beach somewhere, just doing nothing except for kind of vegging on the beach, and it actually makes you more stupid because you're not using your mind. You're kind of just being dull all the time. That has a negative effect on you. I thought that was interesting here. So it does have an effect. IQ changes. That's kind of the main point of that, and so you do change. So, but not from like one life to the next one. It gradually, maybe over many lifetimes, the mind tends to continue. One way of thinking about the mind is to think of the mind like a river. So a river, if you stand on the shore and you look at one point in the river, then every moment there's going to be a different water molecule passing by. So it's changing all the time. But the overall shape of the river, which is a bit like the personality, changes slowly according to the seasons, according to the rainfall, according to these kind of things. So the overall shape, a bit like the overall personality of the person, changes only slowly here. Whereas from moment to moment, the mind changes, just like the water molecules in the river here. Is it helpful to have a IQ? Does that play the role in understanding the Dhamma? I don't think so. I think that Dhamma is very intuitive, and whether you are kind or not will depend on your kind of your. It's an intuitive understanding. You just want to be kind. You know that it is right. There are lots of people who are really intelligent, but they use their intelligence in really bad ways. So I think Dhamma is like or understanding Dhamma or being on the spiritual path is a particular kind of intelligence. You can call it a spiritual intelligence. And I don't think it is related to IQ. It is its own kind of intelligence, if you like. So you can call those people intelligent, but it's a different way of thinking, more like emotional intelligence or something like that. Closer to that, I think. And so, and sometimes you see people who may be terrible at school and academically hopeless, and they are really, really good people. Yeah, they get really good meditation. Go back to the time of the Buddha. You had people who were monks from all the various classes of society, and became arahants from everywhere. Yeah, regardless of where they came from, because they just were good-hearted people. So that's kind of the important point here. And we should measure people by their spiritual qualities and not by all of these other silly qualities. There's too much. This is one of the things I don't like about the world too much. There's too much emphasis on IQ and intelligence, as if that is really, really important. And wisdom is very rarely spoken about, even though wisdom actually creates a much better world than ordinary intelligence. Chula Pandaka story. Okay, so Pantaka, Chula Pantaka means like Pantaka is it's often translated as a wayfarer. In other words, someone who is a traveler, or someone who on the road or something like that. Chula is the lesser or smaller, so the smaller wayfarer or whatever. And the story is, and Ajahn Brahm usually tells the story. He tells about this fellow who was so dumb, so completely, utterly useless academically, he failed first grade or something like that. It's impossible. I'm not sure if he even get grades in the first grade, so I don't know. He was just really. Ajahn Brahm always likes to exaggerate a little bit, which is really, which is nice. Which is nice. That makes the stories interesting. Yeah. So he failed kindergarten, and then. After failing kindergarten, everyone said, "Oh, he's a real dum-dum. He's completely useless. Send him to the monastery." Yeah. So he kind of becomes a monk, and then they try to teach him things in the monastery. Okay, well, at least he can. He couldn't learn anything. He couldn't learn the suttas. Let him do some chanting. He couldn't learn the chanting. Let him do whatever. And so eventually they go to the Buddha and says, "We got this young monk who is so hopeless, he can't do anything. What shall we do with him?" And then the Buddha said, "Well, bring him to me." And he comes to the Buddha, and the Buddha brings him a white cloth. And he says, "Take this white cloth." And he takes this white cloth, and he kind of holds it. And the Buddha said, "Well, just rub a little bit on this white cloth every day." And so he does this. And as he rubs on this white cloth, it becomes stained. And through that, the staining of this white cloth, now correct me if I haven't got the full story here, through that staining of the white cloth, he understands about the defilements of the mind, how the defilements of the mind stain the mind in the same way as they stain this cloth. And that is enough to make him an arahant. Something like that. So he was very intuitive. Yeah, he was obviously not very bright, but he was very intuitive. Is that the correct version of the story? Yeah. Rajahadana, right? Okay, yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the point remains the same, though. We get roughly the point. You just have to. Some people are very intuitive, without being very very smart IQ-wise. Yeah. 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 I find it a little bit hard to hear you, but so the idea is that there's many kind of things happening at the same time, yeah. And one thing is that yes, your wisdom, you do carry the wisdom with you, of course, but the conditions may be very adverse for that wisdom to really come out. If you get reborn, probably you won't get reborn in a mafia family, but let's say you get reborn in a mafia family, and the pressure on you to do bad things is going to be enormous. These are your parents and your siblings and your uncles and aunties telling you to do bad things. And almost regardless of how much wisdom you have, there comes a point when you just kind of cave in to the pressure. But at a certain point in your life, the wisdom may return, and maybe you kind of kick out your family, your mafia family, and you kind of get rid of them, and you kind of get back on course again. But so it's very complicated. And if there is no Buddhism in the world, a lot of that wisdom that we have built up is also related to the Dhamma. So if there is no Dhamma, we may have difficult connecting it to anything in the world. That makes it weaker, is the ability to connect it to something real, like a real Buddha and his teachings, that actually makes it very strong, that wisdom, because we can build on something that is more than just our own intuition and our own feelings. So it's complex, and I mean, these things may seem contradictory, but I think it's just a very complex tapestry of things happening together here. Yeah. Okay, dear Ajahn, thank you for your profound teachings. 1, dependent origination consciousness is shown before feelings. However, in the sequence for the 5 aggregates, consciousness comes after feelings. Why is this so? Okay, doesn't consciousness arise when contact occurs between the sense organs and the external form? How can feeling arise without consciousness? Quite right, it can't. Yeah, that's kind of obvious. Feeling must always arise with consciousness. And so what we are seeing here in dependent origination, we're seeing 2 slightly different things. The first thing is when consciousness establishes itself in a new existence. Sankhara paccaya vijnana. Sankharas are your accumulated karma in the past life, and that decides the level of your consciousness. If you have done lots of good things, you will have a very light and bright consciousness, and it will establish itself in a high place because of that. You feel a bit like a deva, and so bang, consciousness is at that deva level, and then when you die, bang, you continue on that deva level. But if you have done many dodgy things and your mind is a bit dark, your consciousness is on the Peta level. Because you're conscious on the Peta level, you die, you continue on that Peta level, so you get reborn among the Petas. So that is just the establishing of consciousness. And once that consciousness has been established, it sets the general tone for that life, that next life. The general tone has been set. And so nama rupa, which goes with consciousness, will then exist within certain limits. If it is a deva rebirth, nama rupa will have a certain limits that correspond to that deva loka. If you get reborn in the Peta loka, nama rupa will correspond to what happens in Peta loka. In other words, you will have certain perceptions that correspond to the realm you're in, certain feelings that correspond to the realm you're in. Your volitions will be directed to whatever objects or whatever can be achievable in that realm. So everything corresponds to that realm. And that is what that first consciousness means. It's a general establishment of consciousness in that realm. It doesn't mean all the various consciousnesses arising in that realm. It's a general thing. Then once you are in that realm, consciousness will arise on different occasions. And that is what you are talking about here. So you are in that realm. You have the 6 sense bases, or 1 sense base, or however many there is, where you have been reborn. And because you have those sense bases, there will be contact. The object and the sense coming together, and then consciousness. The 3 of them coming together is called contact. And then when there is contact, there is feeling. That is the arising of a specific consciousness within that realm. The first consciousness is the establishment in the realm. This is now the arising of a specific consciousness in that realm. And that gives rise to a specific feeling. The feeling comes together with the consciousness, and then craving, etc. So that's how I understand this sequence. So you need to kind of, So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. So it's not that feeling arises without consciousness, it's just that we're talking about two slightly different things. In the sequence of the five aggregates, it's a different, in dependent origination, it is a causal sequence, how one thing leads to the next one. It's a conditioning sequence. In the five aggregates, it's not really a conditioning sequence. It's more like a sequence of refinement. What is the most refined? So it starts with rupa, which is the most coarse aspect of how we experience our existence, and it is the thing that you give up first when you go into meditation. The body falls away, the senses start to fall away, and then comes Vedana. Vedana is next. Not sure exactly why the sequence is exactly like that, but I guess Vedana is a very important part of existence, and it can be very coarse in some ways. Sanya, and then, but the point here is that consciousness is usually the most refined thing. It's the last thing that we understand in the sequence. Actually, the sequence here is similar to, a little bit similar to what you see in Satipatthana as well, where it starts with body, then Vedana, and then you have Chitta. It's different ways of kind of seeing the meaning of Chitta there. Perception is one of them. But consciousness is the most refined one in the sense that it is the deepest aspect where the sense of self tends to reside. Because you give up the doing, but you still have the knowing in the jhanas. And that knowing is the very last thing that you have. And so it is the most refined aspect of existence that you need to understand properly before you kind of make a full end, seeing through the sense of self fully. So this is why, this is roughly the sequence in the five aggregates. It's slightly different. The gradual understanding of non-self within the five khandhas is not a condition, whereas dependent origination is a conditioned sequence. Okay, we have the, please, Joe. In a sense, the consciousness is transient because the consciousness is related to the object. So, for example, you hear a sound, and then you see something. The hearing of the sound is one kind of consciousness, and then the seeing of something is a different kind of consciousness. And so that consciousness does not carry over. It's not a thing which is behind. It's actually one kind of consciousness, then another kind of consciousness. And usually between all of those sense consciousnesses, you find mind consciousness in between. So ear consciousness, mind consciousness, sight consciousness, apple, orange, pear, that kind of thing. Okay, so we have the last question for the evening, maybe, depending on if we have some freelance questions coming up. We shall see. Dear Ajahn, what happens to the beings, especially animals, who couldn't encounter Dhamma at the end of the world cycle when everything is wiped off? Many thanks. So at the end of the world cycle, and this is kind of one of those slightly conundrum things in the suttas, what exactly happens there? But what it says there is that for the most part, beings go to the Abhasara Loka. And it's kind of weird, because how can beings go to the Abhasaloka as one of the very high jhana realms, right? And it says Yebuyena, they mostly go there, or they lead there. It uses the word Sangvatati. So how can that be the case? Because they haven't made the kamma for that. So it seems like simply by the fact that there is no other place to go, somehow all of them kind of get shuffled off to that realm, or kind of, okay, go there, because there's nowhere else to go. But it's a little bit strange, that whole idea. Maybe some of the other realms still exist. I don't know if the hell realms are still exist at that point, or whether they are wiped out completely. I'm not entirely sure. But what it means, if they go to the Abhasara Loka, then because they may probably still have the kamma of being an animal, then as soon as that kind of world starts to expand again, bang, they go back into the animal realm again. That's real dukkha. You can imagine the dukkha of that. If you've been staying in some beautiful jhana realm for a long time, then you have to go back again. So that is a little bit mysterious exactly how that works, but that seems to be the kind of the general way. You find that in the Aganya Sutta, Digha Nikaya 27, where you find these things. Yeah. Bit like refugees, yeah. They become refugees from the whole world. That's right. Yeah.
All the other realms, the mind-made realms, does it disappear when the material comes?
I think there is a. This is the interesting thing, is in later Buddhism they talk about the different kind of eons and different kind of destructions, and there are different degrees of destruction according to which eon it is. And so you have every eon you destroy everything up to the Brahma Loka, and then every eighth of eon or something like that you destroy everything up to the second Brahma Loka, and every 64 eons you destroy everything up to the, I think, the very high Brahma Lokas. So only those beyond a certain level exist. And so there's all these kind of strange things going on there. And so then you will get reborn, I suppose, according to these various kind of realms. But generally speaking, the Brahma Loka is not touched by these destructions, because they are destructions of like the, I guess, the sensory universe or the sensory world or something. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but the Brahma Lokas are to some extent also related to that's why they're called Rupa Loka, right? There's some remnant there of some kind of elements and things left over. They're not entirely safe from those things. A Rupa Loka would be, but not the Rupa Lokas.
When the fine material, pure realms gets affected by the
It seems like that's possible. Yes, yeah. But I mean, it's all a bit speculative because not really in the sutta. This is more kind of later things. Yeah. Not sure what to think of those things, to be honest. Anything else, everyone? There's only 1 day left. You know that? 1.5 days left. Yeah. Time goes so quickly. It's kind of amazing. Okay, so let's just pay respect to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha.